Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mike O'Brien. I am a Seattle City Council member. I currently chair the Sustainability and Transportation Committee. I'm really just here to introduce our presenter, but I want to say a few words really quick just to thank the amazing work the Transportation Choices Coalition does. I have been a council member now for nearly 10 years, and we continually see data on how we're doing on transit ridership, where we're adding routes, what the transition is in our city, in our region, how that is happening, and we're also comparing it to other jurisdictions. And Seattle has the fastest growing transit ridership of major cities in the country in the past few years. Not like narrowly nudging them out, but just, we're not even on the same trajectory as other cities. And that doesn't happen just by chance. That happens because we're investing in transit significantly, and those investments don't happen by chance. Those happen because we have advocates like the folks in this room. The Transportation Choices has played a leadership role for a number of years in getting this region to make those critical investments so that we all can be proud of the direction our city is going from a transportation perspective. So thank you to the amazing folks, past and present and future, at Transportation Choices Coalition for the work you all do. With that, I want to introduce Hester. She is, I'm going to read your bio because this is so much fun. Hester's decade-long love affair with walking to work drew her to Transportation Choices Coalition, where everyone has an alternative commute and everyone works for hard policies that support pedestrians, bicyclists, and bus riders. After 10 years in the private sector, Hester ditched the corporate ladder and started climbing a nonprofit one instead. It's a long ladder, isn't it? She first volunteered at TCC, then interned, then worked as a contract employee before finally taking the policy analyst and finally the policy director position, which we're all grateful for. She has a master's in public administration from University of Washington's Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. She also sits on the Washington State Transportation Commission. Hester, thanks for all the work you do. Take us away.
Thank you, Mike. And hello, everyone. Thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. Our transit talk, as you can see, is money, 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 making it rain. Oh, making it rain for transit. Our panelists will discuss sources of transportation funding from the state and county level and talk about what funding our system could look like in the near future. So thank you, Councilmember O'Brien, your office, for hosting us here at City Hall, and thank you to the Seattle Channel for filming us. Follow us on social, and you'll get the link to the show later, and you can share it with all your friends. There are blank index cards at your table. If you have any questions as we go through, please jot down the questions you have, and then towards the end, we will have someone, Kelsey, I believe, Kelsey, raise your hand. We'll come around and collect them so that we can address some of them with our Q&A portion. So first, we'd like to do land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish, a people that are still here and currently fighting for federal recognition. We practice land acknowledgements as a nonprofit whose work fights for mobility and environmental justice for all on land that does not belong to us. We also do it as an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and as a way of honoring the indigenous people who've been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Today we're joined by a great panel of experts and leaders from a variety of organizations with unique perspectives on the topic, but I'll do quick bios for them as well. So down at this end, we have Rima Griffith. She's been the executive director of the Washington State Transportation Commission since 2005. Under her leadership, the commission serves as the state tolling authority, sets the fares and policies for the ferry system, leads the state's long-term transportation planning, provides guidance to the legislature, and more. Prior to the commission, past positions held by Rima include serving as senior policy and fiscal analyst to the State House and Senate Transportation Committees, serving as the executive policy advisor to the director of the Department of Licensing, and serving as the general manager for a U.S. office of an international trading company. Then we have John Risha, who's an experienced leader with more than 20 years of working on transportation and mobility in the Puget Sound. He's led every transportation management association in the region, supported King County Council as the chief policy officer, been an elected city council member in both Redmond and Lake Forest Park, and is now Metro Transit's assistant general manager for finance and administration. He and his teams have worked extensively on transportation and transit funding opportunities and brings a wealth of knowledge about the practical needs of both funding and transit delivery. He's a year-round bike to light rail commuter, logging thousands of bike miles each year as part of his commute. Senator Joe Nguyen serves in the 34th District, where he was born and raised. He's the first person of color elected to the legislature from the 34th and the first Vietnamese state senator in the history of Washington. His experiences growing up in an immigrant community and being raised by a single mother informs much of his service today. Senator Nguyen has a diverse policy portfolio ranging from justice reform to transformative technology issues and transportation access. Last session, he led efforts for increased multimodal options by securing funding for ferries and enabling e-scooters. Thank you. He also worked to ensure future electrification efforts were done with an equity lens in mind. Senator Nguyen lives in West Seattle with his family. Bryce Yaden currently acts as government affairs representative for TCC. He's worked on state policy for the past 13 years in varying capacities, including staff to the Senate Transportation Committee chair. For the past 5 years, he's worked on state-level transportation and land use issues. He has a master's in environmental sustainable management from Middlesex University in London and a BA in political science from Seattle University. So just very quick warm-up question. Please state your name, your pronouns, and your favorite place to take transit during the fall. Bryce, why don't you kick us off?
Bryce, he, him, and my favorite place to take transit in the fall is probably all year round, and it's actually the 120 to get to and from downtown Seattle, funny enough, because it's reliable and it's always running.
I'm Joe, he, him pronouns, and my favorite place to take transit, actually not even like work related. My kids love going on the train, so we'll go on like the Sea Line and then down to light rail, and we just ride it. Like they just like to ride it.
I'm John, he, him, and my favorite in the fall, Sounders playoff match. Woo!
I'm Rima, she, her, and from Olympia. I would say my transit use, I have 2 minutes limited, but I like to take it to see the Seahawks play.
Thank you, everyone. So we will now kick off presentations. The 3 prompts provided our panelists were: how is our transportation system currently funded? What sources of funding can keep us moving forward? And what are equitable revenue sources that are currently available to us? And are there other models that we should consider for future funding? Of course, everyone has a different background and perspective, and we'll approach this from different ways. Each panelist has about 7 to 8 minutes to present, and then I'll have a couple questions, and then we'll get to the audience questions. So again, write down your questions. Kelsey will come around when we prompt her to get them. So Rima, take it away.
Yep. So I'm going to stand because I like to move around and I can see the screen. Yeah, sure, if you don't mind. Thank you. Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go quickly over a slide deck that just kind of gives you a 101 snapshot of transportation with a little focus on transit. And we'll just kind of set the stage, I guess, for the discussion around transportation funding. So real quick, this is just a breakdown of the state gas tax today, 49.4 cents. You'll see the breakdowns below it. The 9.5 nickel and 11.9 were the 3 last packages essentially enacted by the legislature. 11.9 was the 2015-16 package. That'll raise about $16 billion over 16 years, all infrastructure-heavy investments. And all of those, most of those dollars are pretty much all dedicated to bonds and infrastructure with some other investments in preservation and ferries and other things. Then going to the right, you'll see 11 cents. It's dedicated to cities and counties. They get a direct cut, and about 4 cents is currently going to pay off current bonds that were issued. So basically the message of this chart is we have 8 cents left on the table for non-dedicated things. So maintenance, preservation, safety, all those other things transportation at the state level has to do is got to come out of that 8 cents. So when we go talk to the public about the challenges with our long-term funding sustainability, we like to bring this chart because a lot of people obviously see the legislature showing leadership and raise the gas tax 3 times since '03, and so there's a sense my taxes are going up. Why do you keep telling me we don't have enough money? Well, there is a lot of money going into infrastructure primarily, but there's not a lot of money left on the table for everything else we have to do that's really important. Present picture, just a real quick snapshot. Federal gas tax built 90% of our current interstate system, but Congress last increased the gas tax at the federal level in 1993. So we're a little behind on that one. So as you can imagine, federal dollars coming to states has continued to decline and is not sustainable. Congress since 2008 has transferred nearly $143 billion from the general fund just to maintain the funding levels for transit and transportation nationwide. So not a sustainable model. Our commission, along with Oregon's and California, has just recently sent a letter, but has sent about 3 letters to our collective West Coast congressional delegation, encouraging them to raise the gas tax, infuse some money into the system, and start investing in transportation as we watch our interstate system crumble and our transit services fall further and further behind, and noting that we do not have high-speed rail in this country as a developed country. The state, we're currently at about just under $10 billion for this biennium, less than 8.4% of the total state budget when you combine it with the general fund, education, healthcare, et cetera. And then you'll see below just a breakdown of how that those transportation dollars are split. Lion's share going to DOT, followed by bond payments at 17%. And I will note that by 2027, we expect our bond payment share to rise to about 75% of our gas tax dollars. So not a trend that we also want to continue on. Sources of transportation, you'll see here the lion's share is coming from the fuel tax, followed by license permits and fees, and then bond sales at 14%. Federal funds are down there at 12%, and then you've got ferries and tolls and a few other things, a little bit of sales tax. So not a lot of hope when we think about the sustainability of gas tax and cars becoming more fuel efficient. That is going to need to be backfilled and ultimately replaced if we're going to sustain what revenues we have today. We've been making, as I mentioned, big capital investments with our dollars. I think 52% is going currently toward those highway improvements. Meanwhile, DOT needs about $665 million a year just to maintain and preserve the current highways we have today in our state. The current budget enacted provides $384 million. So we're well behind on that, with a concern around the long-term, again, sustainability and worry of our highways crumbling to the point that that dollar or price tag is going to continue to increase as we watch those roads decrease in terms of their ability to drive on. The last revenue package in 2016 dedicated only 9% of our state highway funds to preservation. So in terms of transit agencies, clearly it is a very highly localized and supported system. And I'm sure John's going to back this one up. But as you can see, 87% of funding is coming from local revenue sources, primarily local sales tax. Transit fares, of course, play a role in that. Federal funds at 11%. Again, we feel like the federal level involvement should increase, hopefully someday, if they generate more money. We're hoping that will grow. But we also, as the commission level, have urged the state legislature to consider further defining the role of the state in transit and considering targeted approaches and areas of transit that the state should consider investing in, utilizing some kind of criteria or purpose for that investment, but recognizing that transit serves a vital purpose both for connecting communities in rural areas as well as congestion relief in our urban areas. So we see it as a critical partnership and a necessary link in our transportation system. Local funds also provide about 71% of the capital investment for transportation or for transit agencies. Again, coming from local sources primarily, with some federal dollars as well coming in. Very little state investment is happening right now in transit, as you can see from this chart and the prior chart. The future of funding, it's uncertain, and we know there's no silver bullet or single source that's going to solve this problem. The gas tax is viable today, but we have been doing a lot of work on road usage charging, thinking about the future and how we replace the gas tax and what that could mean in terms of how the funding is used. Tolling, as you're probably well aware, continues to expand as the legislature authorizes new highways and segments to be tolled. Express toll lanes and hot lanes also continue to expand. That's a good thing for transit because the commission has transit going free in all of the tolled facilities and the express toll lanes. It provides a dedicated lane for transit to move, so there's kind of a win-win on those facilities. We list license fees, of course, is there. Those are regressive and flat, but the legislature does utilize them. And then, we put excise tax up there because the motor vehicle excise tax is a tool that local jurisdictions are using. The state no longer uses it. But in 2000, when the legislature, in response to the initiative at the time that failed, but the legislature went ahead and enacted the repeal of the motor vehicle excise tax at the state level, we gutted our funding for ferries and transit. And we've never replaced it, and we've never identified a new dedicated source for that. So that continues to be a nagging issue of how do you generate the kinds of big dollars you need for transit, for the ferry system, and for flexible multimodal uses that we don't have anymore. And the commission has put forward a revenue proposal back in 2011, 2012 that put forward a lower rate excise tax at the state level that would have been dedicated. And so that, we believe, is still a tool that the legislature should consider. Sales tax is also on the table, and then, as I mentioned, road usage charging is something that will be going to the legislature this January with recommendations on how to advance that in Washington state and think about a transition away from the gas tax. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is actually a fun topic for me. Yes, money is a good thing for transit. So let's talk a little bit about Metro right now. We deliver about 125 million trips a year. That's about, I want to say, about 500,000 trips, and when you include Sound Transit that we deliver for them on a daily basis. It's just this amazing amount of mobility. And unfortunately, my slides are going to try and go faster than me. Some things that are important to us. If you notice, 56% of our revenue comes from sales tax. And that's a pretty sizable amount. And sales tax is not exactly what someone would call a progressive revenue. It's highly volatile, and it's something that creates some real challenges for us. And I'll show you about that in a little bit. Metro Connects is our long-range plan, and that actually has this great vision of what transit should be. I like to simplify it down to everybody should be within 15 minutes of at least 15-minute service, and in more urbanized areas, it should be 10 minutes within 10 minutes of 10-minute or less service. People should be able to rely on it. So it's really important that this is a plan that's based off of every city's comprehensive plan. It's not made up for transit's sake. It's made up for the growth that's happening in this region. Now, there's a big problem with that. It's not funded. It's a great vision, and we need about $250 million a year to cover it, and that means about 1.5 million more hours of service. And service isn't just regular bus service. It's a variety of mobility choices. And it's about $5 billion of capital. That's capital from our perspective as a county transit provider, but that's also in partnership with all of the jurisdictions doing quite a bit of additional work within their own transportation system to keep transit flowing. Nothing wrong, nothing better than having good lanes and good operations of transit. So let's just have a little bit of a note in here. The city of Seattle did us a favor during the economic recession. They went out and got some revenue, and they represent a pretty significant portion of our transit system through their own transportation benefit district funding. It's about 1/10 of all of our service, and it represents about 5% of our revenues. Now let's talk a little bit about sales tax. Sales tax, highly volatile. That kind of a swing on an annual basis is crazy. And we have to figure out how to not spend it during the peak years and how to save it during the years where you've got revenue coming in. Now let's talk a little bit about some other things. Our goals, we want stable and progressive revenues. We don't have those. We don't have those tools available to us. We got what we got. Right now, the Transportation Benefit District for a county on a countywide basis could go after about 0.2% of sales tax. Little frame of reference, each 0.1% represents about $75 million a year for us as a county. There's some tolling authority out there. Would take some partnership with the state to think about that. and parking taxes. We also have property tax authority. Every penny per thousand on property tax represents about $6.8 million. So 10 cents is about 68 million. Good frame of reference. We have talked about different sources of revenue. We'll take them. Senator, please, we'll take them. Income, capital gains, wealth tax, carbon taxes, they're all have been subject of many discussions. And we're happy to see any of them come forward that can be more progressive than what we've got today. But we know that that's going to take time and effort to bring together the right kind of coalitions to make that happen. Different things can bring in different revenues, and we're happy to see any of them. So we're glad to continue that conversation. And there's lots of folks who have recommended it. Now, I want to bring one other aspect into this, and that's equity. Question for folks. How many in this room have driven on I-5 in the last month? Okay. How many of you planned or helped build I-5? So you're all subject to the bias of the system that was created. So we're all using something that has gone backwards and created gaps in our transportation system that even when we apply our transit service, we're leaving gaps out there. And so we have to also be thinking about how we fill those gaps, how we think about those people who have been left behind and marginalized in our system, because every person in our community has a right to be able to be an economic participant in our society. And we need to figure out how we address that. So we need to think about things like our low-income fare program, what else we can do to provide for access to transit through fares. We also need to think about how we build out our infrastructure, where we make our transportation investments. We also ought to be thinking about how we can use other tools like an earned income credit and modify state law to make that possible so that we can give back to those people. If we can't not charge them, let's find a way to get the money back in their pocket. So there's different ways, and to us as a transit agency, those are important concepts that we want to see carried forward in any discussions. So with that, we need the help of this region to figure out how to proceed. There could be some needs post I-976. Don't know what that's going to look like. Seattle's got some choices to make in the coming months about where they go because their TBD needs to be renewed. And the region needs to figure out how we fund it. So let's make it rain.
Nice, thank you. First off, I'm just going to point out that I'm probably the least qualified and least experienced person as it relates to transportation issues at this table, but I'm the only one that gets to vote on it. Right, so fundamentally, I think one of the biggest things that we can do as advocates is to elect and get more people involved in the process who are impacted by this process. I think one of the things that people confuse about politics is that it's about being right or wrong. That's actually not the case. It's making sure that your issue is worthy of being discussed. And oftentimes that gets left behind, right? So in the legislature, we see about 3,000 or 4,000 bills in any given year. 3,000 or 4,000 bills. Only about 200 or 300 actually pass, so less than 10%. So a lot of times people don't come and say, oh, that's a bad idea, we don't want to do that. It's, well, you know, it's not my priority, so it doesn't actually happen. So it was really cool to see the equity issues that you brought up on that last slide, because the earned income tax credit or the working families tax credit in Washington State is one of the things that we're advocating for, and certainly would contribute to more equitable societies as it comes to our transportation issues. What's interesting, Rima's presentation is going to be way more robust than mine because she knows about this way more than I do. But the fuel tax is 38% of the Washington State budget for transportation funding. However, if you look at ones that are the most controversial, tolling, and even like the license and fees and permits, that's 15% and 4% respectively. So even the idea of some of the things that are the most controversial don't actually contribute the most amount of money when it comes to our transportation efforts. So we have these blocks when it comes to politics in Washington State as we fund transportation issues. I just got back from Denmark a couple of weeks ago where they do things a lot different than we do here. Not saying that that is exactly how we should do it, but it was a fascinating experience kind of understanding their process. There was an oil embargo in the 70s, and gas prices skyrocketed. And what they had happened was they were 99% dependent upon foreign oil, and that nearly crippled their entire economy. So they then had a keen focus to find more renewable, find more sustainable ways to have transportation and also development. What they ended up doing was they kept their gas prices at that amount from the 1970s. And as the gas prices started to decrease, that became a carbon tax. And they used all that money towards the infrastructure for that area as well. They have an excise fee a tariff for cars, which is like 200%, which is very high. But they doubled down and put money towards the infrastructure that they needed to actually alleviate not just carbon emissions, but also increase mobility access for people that are there. You saw that slide as well where the amount that we're funding for transportation in Washington State is half of what we need, half. I represent an area that includes Vashon Island, which needs ferries. Ferries are expensive. They're about $180 million each. I think that's like 200 buses or 300 buses or so. I don't know how much each bus costs. It's around that ballpark. So one ferry is like 300 buses, right? So they're very expensive, and we don't have a dedicated stream associated with it. So I had to negotiate for 5 new ferries, or else we would not have new ferries. That's the state we're in terms of our transportation. And oftentimes I'll hear from folks, well, I'm paying so much here, I'm paying so much there. You are. You absolutely are. And it's because we have a regressive tax structure in Washington State. We have the most amount, honestly, like Seattle is one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest state in the entire nation, and we can't even pay to fill potholes because of our tax structure in Washington State. So all the things that we're talking about obviously are effective, the RUC, the fees and all that stuff, but that's really nibbling around the edges. Even if we had a RUC, I don't think that's even enough to pay for the basic infrastructure that we need in Washington State. We really have to be more transformative, and organizations like TCC and others have supported carbon initiatives in the past that would have gotten us towards that. So I think as an advocate and as an ally, that's one of the biggest things that you can do is trying to change that narrative in terms of how do we actually address this? How do we actually do a good job in terms of funding in an equitable way? What's interesting is I'm getting a lot of emails right now about the hybrid fee, $75 more. Super frustrating. I initially was going to vote no because I didn't want to spend more money on car tabs. So they came and they said, hey, how can we get you to vote yes? Like, what are the issues that you care about the most associated with this? And I was like, well, I'm tired of tax credits and infrastructure going to wealthy communities and not the communities that I cared about. So in part of that package, they promised to build charging stations, infrastructure in communities of color. And I was like, damn it, you did it. Now I have to actually vote yes on this because that's what I said. But that's the hard decision that you have to make as a legislature. You have to make that decision where you know people in your community are going to pay more for something, and you don't want them to, but you also want them to have an opportunity to have access to transit in another way so they don't have to use their car. So that's the balance that we're at right now. It's not easy, and I'll be the first one to say that the more help we have, the better. I'll be honest, I'm probably more angry now after this first session, which we arguably had a good year, than I was even when we were running for office, because I saw how effective the legislature could be with just a handful of new progressive leaders pushing and fighting for the things that we cared about, like lowering emissions, like access to multimodal transportation. So by having more people involved, by getting more people pushing as well to supporting these efforts, that's how we're gonna get systemic change. We're not going to get it by doing the same things that we've been doing. We're not going to get it by being incremental in terms of how we approach this problem. Because to me, here I'm going to give you a story before I wrap up. Whenever elementary school kids come to visit me, so like 5th and 6th graders, the first thing I'll say is, hey, welcome to Olympia. Fun note, I'm actually closer in age to all of you that are now coming to visit me in Olympia than to the vast majority of the people that I work with. And not to say that age is a bad thing, but I'm just saying that the folks who are making the decisions, like you mentioned, who built I-5, are not the ones who are going to be impacted by the decisions that we make. So we need to have these elementary school students come in. We need to have youth from, Zero Waste Washington come and talk to us about transportation and infrastructure to make it a part of their process as well. And I think we could do a better job as a whole, engaging our young people and being a part of that process to have more equitable solutions for transportation. But in terms of like funding, I don't know. I support a 1631. I support a carbon initiative. I'm cautiously optimistic / hesitant about some of the new proposals coming up. Bryce probably knows more about that than I do. But really, at the end of the day, we just need to make sure that we have an equitable way to fund these things. So here's I'm going to just give you an example of a potential progressive. Am I too long? 1 minute? Yeah, I don't normally talk a lot, but this is actually a passion area for me. So talk about progressive funding, right? So like I have a bill called a wealth inequality bill, and last year I dropped it more to prove a point. But the more that I talk about it, the more I'm like, I'm just going to try to pass this. So it's an excise fee for corporations that pay people over $1 million. So anything under $1 million, not touched. If you get paid $1,001,001, your liability is 2 cents. Sounds very similar to Senator Warren's 2 cents as well. And you know how much that would raise? So only like 2 cents on top of the excess of $1 million. It raises $300 million a year. There is so much wealth in Washington State that even just charging millionaires 2 cents, over $1 million, you can raise $300 million. That closes the gap on our transportation needs. We can do this. Like, this is not an impossible thing. The only thing stopping us is ourselves. So we need more people pushing. Bryce is there. Keep helping him too.
Thank you. Appreciate that. On one of his last notes, we actually went to undergrad at Seattle U together, and it's a trip when you walk in and you realize somebody that you used to have beers with up on campus is now the guy that you're asking to do all of these great things, and he agrees with you on most of it. It's fascinating work. And anyway, so I think I'm going to kind of take it from an advocate perspective and talk about what Transportation Choices does, a portion of my work in Olympia, advocating for a whole host of things. There's two questions I tend to ask before I walk into an office asking for money is, how is it getting funded? What's the source? And what is it going to, and what is actually going to get funded? We've talked about equity, which is now arguably the thing that we should be focusing most on. If we have an equitable funding source, we can use it to do equitable spending and actually get equitable outcomes. So those are the two big things that we're talking about a lot. Rima did a great job at talking about a whole host of things. She put the gas tax up there. The biggest problem we have with the gas tax in Washington State is called the 18th Amendment. It restricts how we can actually use those funds. That's one of the biggest barriers and why we actually see the state being so low and failing actually at investing in transit and multimodal options. Right now, the current funding structure, generally speaking, Rima put it up there, just on capital needs, and this doesn't include Sound Transit because Sound Transit currently doesn't get any dollars from the state. So this is Metro and all the other ones. The state adds about 3%, $54 million a year. Local options is 76% of their funds. We actually charge more in fares than the state provides the local jurisdictions to do any of this work. That is really one of the biggest equity issues we have is not only are we taxing ourselves to build our system, but then we're doing it again whenever somebody steps on a bus or steps on a train or any of the modes of transportation that we're using. And in 2015, we had a very large transportation revenue bill that was passed. That's how we got Sound Transit 3. That's all exciting. A total of 7% of that went to bike, pedestrian, and transit. 24% of that went to highway expansion. We are doing our system backwards, kind of talking about what are the gaps in I-5 and who built it and who's using it. We're continuing to build out a system that looks backwards, and we're not looking forward, and we're actually causing a lot of harm. This is air pollutants, this is health issues, and a whole host of other things. So that's kind of where we're starting at and where we have to get away from, and a lot of people have talked about that, and that's why we have people like Senator Wynn, who's able to actually bring a perspective that historically hasn't been able to been heard as much. A couple other things I wanted to talk about real quick is Rima brought up a road usage charge. Right now, the way it's actually being talked about in Olympia is a replacement for the gas tax. That's wrong. It has to be something different. If we just do it as a replacement for the gas tax, all that's going to go back into highways, and all of a sudden we have not fixed our actual transportation problem. So we have to be asking ourselves, how are we funding our system and what's it going to? So as we move forward on a road usage charge conversation, one of the biggest things Transportation Choices is doing is asking, how are we actually going to use those funds? And if we restrict it, we're not helping ourselves. A big thing that is also really exciting is there's a coalition that Kelsey at Transportation Choices has helped build, and we call it the Clean and Just Table. And we're fundamentally trying to figure out what are our next steps. There's 6 transportation goals that the state actually is supposed to follow. WashDOT does a good job. The commission does a good job. Equity isn't one of them. We don't look at equity when we talk about funding our transportation system and building it. It talks about the environment, but it doesn't actually say what we're trying to do. Are we actually trying to enhance the environment, or are we just trying to keep it the same? We horribly underfund stormwater, so we have a massive problem on that as well. So those are the types of things that we're talking about. We really need to turn our system upside down. The other thing I want to mention, just in closing, to understand how the state looks, or a whole host of people, and again, the senator said it correctly when he said most of those people are twice my age that are making these decisions. There's the TBDs that were talked about, the transportation benefit districts. There's a whole different, a few options. One of them are vehicle tolls. But last year there was a bill to say that no one can institute vehicle tolls. So we actually have state law that allows us to do something, and people then trying to take it away from us from the limited availability. So we need a lot more voices. We're down there. We need all the help we can get, and we need to start really changing that conversation moving forward. And we have great advocates. We've had a great year last year. We have a lot of exciting new members. Just finished up a great conversation with Representative Slatter about coming up with new goals for the transportation system and setting up metrics so we actually know what we're doing instead of just saying we're building it. So those are the big things, and I think as an advocate we have to continuously challenge what the current structure is and know that we can do better. That wasn't as exciting.
Thank you, everybody. All right, I'm going to ask one question, but while I do, it's time for you to make sure you've jotted down your own questions, and then once you've got them, put them high up in the air, and Kelsey will come collect them. So Bryce actually stole my question thunder a little bit. I was going to talk about how, for the most part, unless you're going for a really great walk or taking a road trip or just chatting with your friends on the bus, transportation isn't necessarily end in and to itself. It's usually how we get somewhere. It's usually in service of trying to improve the environment or mobility. So I guess my question is, what are our goals for transportation? What should they be? And how do we align that with the kinds of revenue sources we want and the investments we make? I'm going to skip Bryce because he started talking about it, but you can add something at the end. So if you, Rima, if you want to start, and then we'll come down the line. I have about a minute.
Well, that's a heavy question. I would say, generally speaking, coming from my background, our goals that we currently have in statute, there are 6 statutory goals that are very broadly stated, and you can drive a truck through them. They're not real specific. That's good and bad. Those are a good start. I think establishing criteria that helps trigger investments has been something the commission has advocated over the years, and is something that we've talked with decision makers about. So putting a little more direction that will, in essence, carry the effect of kind of driving legislative investments, which frankly they don't really like to be constrained by. So there's a little bit of a tension there as we talk about instigating or creating more structure around investments and how dollars get channeled based on maybe more of an objective series of metrics or outcome priorities that are in law that would, in essence, dictate how certain funds get distributed. That's not a crazy thought. It happens in other states, and it does bring more predictability and structure to long-term investments so that modal planners can anticipate those distributions, in essence, to plan and work around what local funding they may need to raise to supplement. But it really always comes down to money. And I think for us, a goal has got to be, we've got to determine a funding sustainability future, a pathway how we're going to achieve this. And roads are needed for everybody, including buses. And so I think we have to get away from divisively talking about things to saying, how do we fund our multimodal needs and ensure that our infrastructure, which is the backbone of the economy, is also in place? We can't let the roads crumble and enhance transit, for example. So I think rather than take away from roads, we need to think about what are we not doing for the multimodal investments. And there clearly, as I mentioned, when 695 was enacted and the motor vehicle excise tax went away, we gutted our multimodal funding, and it has not been replaced. And it was a huge amount of money that impacted ferries and transit. So until we solve that problem, rather than take from the limited high-demand dollars that there's not enough for anybody to do anything, frankly, we need to add to it rather than put more people on it that are competing for that very limited source. And I think that's the challenge for lawmakers to determine is how do we add to and dedicate to those purposes.
So at Metro, we've got 3 simple outcomes we're trying to achieve. Super simple things. Community health, economic vitality, and environmental sustainability. That's all we deliver. And we do it actually through our currency, which is trips. Our Metro Connects plan has a goal of 1 million trips a day, which is roughly double what we deliver today. And we think we can get there with about a 25% increase in the service levels we have as we realign it and as Sound Transit comes on board and all of those other things. So we're all about the livability of people and that mobility and the connections between work, homes, recreation, and how we get to those space is just through mobility and mobility choices.
I'm not going to touch on the goals per se so much, but just kind of give you an example of how broken our system is, where we certainly have emission goals with our governor and just our ethos. We want to lower emissions in Washington State, which means more efficient cars, less usage of fossil fuels, which is completely opposed to the idea of how we raise revenue in Washington State through the gas tax, right? So like if we're actually hitting our goals as a state by lowering emissions, it fundamentally means we're going to have less money to pay for multimodal. Like that's how broken it is right now. So not to not give hope, but I'm just saying we need to fundamentally shift how we think about transportation, infrastructure, and financing in Washington State to meet any kind of goals.
I just want to build on that a half a second. We also have vehicle mile travels goal that we're not tracking. And, well, we're tracking it, but we're not actually, they're not hard and fast. They're not saying that we're going to change anything. It's more of like a here's what we're doing and maybe we should fix it type of activity. And the other thing that comes to mind is we have these goals that talk about it holistically, but none of the work that we're doing in terms of outputs is holistic. Rima brought up a good point. Our buses run on roads, which is great. A lot of our local roads, though, are still funded through a levy that we're passing ourselves. And we have 11 cents going to the locals. Don't get me wrong, that's great. We need that. But we really are talking about a holistic system and how it integrates. And we're not necessarily getting to that point with the current goals and the current outcomes. We got to grow the whole thing, but we got to make sure that as we grow it, we're doing it in an equitable manner and we're investing in the right way.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a lot of great questions. We have about 10 minutes. I'm going to try and get through a few of them. One of them is just a question that I should probably know, but wondering if anyone else knows. What is our transit spending like in Washington State compared to other states, and do we know if they have dedicated funding sources?
I have the one for the current capital needs. We're ranked 17th on funding per capita for capital dollars for transportation. This works out to about $14 per person, per capita. The national average is $42.11, so we're pretty far behind, even though we're 17th. And mind you, again, the one flashpoint about that is that's not talking about operations dollars, which would probably skew that even further. And this is the only thing that the state can invest in is capital dollars. They don't actually put bus drivers and bus hours out there. They only do the capital. But I think John probably knows more.
No, I can tell you that most states and most transit systems have a strong relationship to income taxes. Pause. Okay, never mind. Moving on. And as a result of that, they have a different kind of stable revenue stream. And so our system is way different. You saw the percentage that we rely 56% heading towards 60% on sales taxes for our total of $1.2 billion a year of current revenues. And that means we're funding all of our operations, which is close to 4 million hours a year, plus We right now have a $3 billion capital program, and we've got about a $5 billion hole of capital we need to invest in. So the scale of this is real, and we know what we need in King County to get to that space. And as I mentioned earlier, it's about $250 million a year for the transit, including the capital needs.
I don't have an actual number on the national, but you made me think of something, which is we talk about the urban need, and we're in Seattle, so that makes sense. But when we look about it from a statewide perspective, we have a majority of our state is rural, and rural transit is really struggling. And some would argue that that service in those rural areas is even more vital than perhaps in urban areas, because it's providing critical transportation for people that literally can't even safely walk if they wanted to or ride a bike. So there's like this whole other demand out there that's huge, and I don't have a number, but is begging the question of what are we doing about connecting our rural communities so that people can move safely and equitably and cost effectively, who can't afford a car but are perhaps living for whatever reason or circumstance that led them to living in a rural community, maybe by choice, but they're there and they really literally cannot move without owning a vehicle. So those are challenges that I think we also at the state level are constantly challenging ourselves with, of how do we solve that problem outside the urban dilemma.
Great. So I'm going to try and combine two questions. Coming back to something that Rima said around, transit uses roads, and that's absolutely correct. Like we can't put our transportation needs and investments in silos. I think there has been a good conversation around the benefits of preservation and maintenance of those roads and new roads. And so one person asks, how can we discourage spending money on new roads, which often induces demand for driving and leads to carbon pollution and traffic? Another person references the Transportation for America announcement a few weeks ago. They're a national transportation advocacy group, and they said, you know what, we're going to stop advocating for new money, because what we're doing is growing and growing the taxes that we have on folks and then pouring them into policies that don't necessarily work, or policies that get us to new highways that induce demand and increase GHG emissions. So they characterize it as not a revenue problem, it's a policy problem. So how can principles like that be used to change priorities in the state, and what would it really take to do a maintenance first program? So that's for whoever wants to take it first.
I thought the senator was going to have a brilliant answer for this. I mean, that's interesting. I think that's a really thought-provoking point of maybe we flip the coin and we don't advocate for new money. We just force everybody to deal with what they have. And I guess that would work, at least in Washington State, if only we had enough money on the table to deal with everything. And I think the undeniable facts are out there, whether you talk to transit agencies or highway departments, or the ferry system, or on and on it goes, rural counties. We are watching our transportation system. It's all connected. It's all like a big chain, and one link breaks, it all breaks, unfortunately. It's falling woefully behind. And how you get at the taxation equity issue and balance of what taxpayers are going to pay to help dig us out of this hole we've fallen into is one really heavy policy discussion that has to happen by innovative policymakers and decision makers. I don't think the answer is reducing revenues. How you equitably distribute the cost liability of that is a challenge. But the fact is, you can say you don't need any more if we knew we could redistribute what we had and meet our needs, but we know we can't. And so this constant question of tension of who pays, how much do they pay, how do we distribute, and then how do you establish policies and law that ensure we're tending to our urban and our rural needs is just this ongoing, really heavy debate and challenge around what we do. And I wish we could say, but you saw the numbers. I mean, we're half investing in our preservation. Does that mean the legislature maybe shouldn't have put so much in new shiny stuff? Maybe. But until we have ribbon cuttings for payment projects, I don't know that we're going to change the politics of that. But it's just, unfortunately, it's one of those things that it's just not a sexy, high visibility thing, yet it's like so critical to what we need to do to function. So I think innovative thinking around taxation is becoming more and more of a pressing issue, and reinventing the box of how we assess those policies of who pays and how much is at the core of that. And there simply just is no single answer that's going to solve that, unfortunately.
So I think from my perspective, I think there's one thing is, again, and Hester just brought this up, is we've siloed our transportation system so much in terms of here's roads and they go for cars, here's a bike lane, they only go for bike, and then we're actually moving people. We're functionally trying to move people. That's the only thing that we're trying to do. But we don't look at it holistically. So, electric vehicles, I love them, they're great, but they still create stormwater, right? We still have tire dust that are that's really, really bad for our salmon as we try and save the orcas. So we have to look at what is the full cost of our transportation system if we have 5,000 cars going down running all their tires, or are we moving 5,000 people on bikes all of a sudden, and all of a sudden our stormwater might go down. But you also look at the maintenance, the long-term maintenance of different modes of transit and transportation that we have, and start talking about 10,000 times more impact on roadways for cars and trucks as it is for cyclists. I mean, these are the things we don't actually talk about when we talk about our holistic transportation system. And again, I'm not trying to say we can't have roads and we can't have cars. We have rural areas, actually, and so we just have to start talking about it. And what are we? Again, I ask, what are we funding and how are we funding it? Are we funding the right stuff right now? And are we equitably doing it? And until we bring that holistic approach to our transportation system, we're going to kind of keep. But we do need to focus on maintenance and preservation and move away from thinking that having 4 lanes is going to all of a sudden release congestion if you only have 3 there right now. Tell me how LA's doing and their 9-lane highways in each direction, and tell me if they've got any less congestion right now.
So I'll add one more piece before I hope the senator has a wonderful solution. But we have a bit of a challenge with the way we go after new taxes now at the state and at the federal level. Even our grant programs are structured around new and shiny things. And so legislators at all levels have to figure out how to sell something to the voting public. And frequently that's with ribbon cuttings. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but that's what our system does today. We as a transit agency need roads. We need right-of-way. We need right-of-way that doesn't have 4-inch potholes in it. That means we have to do the unsexy thing of funding our pavement programs, being able to enable our local electeds to do some level of increase of taxes to keep pace with the cost of doing business. And we need to think about revenue sources that aren't specifically tied to shiny new objects. I hope that that's possible in some fashion, but it's a challenge. And that's what our system of taxation has come to now. And the more we do benefit districts, the more we end up with this problem.
Yeah, I don't know if I have like an answer per se, but like as one of the more progressive members in the legislature who's very vocal about equitable taxation, I actually want to lower taxes for probably everybody in this room and most of the folks watching on TV as well. In Washington State, if we have an income tax, we can actually do it in a way where most folks would pay less than they are now, raise enough revenue to pay for the things that we're talking about, and the people who would be paying a little bit more, proportionally, is very small. It's like 2% of their income, right? So like, income tax sounds scary. I was actually invited to an event with the chamber, which was odd, but I went, and we had a conversation, and it was good, and we actually talked about income tax with the chamber, the same one that just dropped $1 million into our city council race. And I was like, are you serious? You guys invited me on this day? Like, this is the worst thing for me to be here. But we had a conversation about income tax, we had a conversation about paying their fair share in taxes, and people actually are starting to get it. I had folks who I knew from the public space who usually in public would not say the things that they said privately to me, where we fundamentally are at a point where we are at literally a breaking point. Roads are going to crumble, schools aren't going to get funded, you're not going to get the things that you need, people are feeling overly taxed. Yet we have the highest concentration of billionaires behind like maybe Silicon Valley, maybe New York, but like the highest concentrations of millionaires that are here. It's okay for them to pay a little bit more. So we can actually, again, as a progressive Democrat, lower taxes and raise enough revenue to pay for the things that we need.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Let's have a round for our panel. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you all for being here during your lunch hour. The video will be posted soon after we talk with the Seattle Channel. Seattle Channel, thank you for filming us, and have a great afternoon.